My name is Roger Fraser. I'm a longtime activist in the suburbs of Chicago, and I have a guest with me today who is a Iraq veteran, Iraq war veteran, and he has a story to tell. I'm largely going to shut up in a minute or so and let him tell his story. It's relevant today because, as many of you know, but also there's a lot of folks that don't know, this is a war. This is a war in the Middle East, which still is going on in various countries surrounding Iraq and also in Iraq itself. And so I'm going to introduce Cameron Hallas to you and let him largely tell his story. Let's let him tell his story, because again, I think you're going to find it extremely fascinating. It's an on the grounds report of his experiences in Iraq. Cameron, go ahead. Explain how it was that you enlisted and why, your age. Give a bit of background, and then and tell us what it was that compelled you to enlist, and then what your experiences were on the ground in Iraq, and then afterwards.
We were originally from the Chicago area, and after a couple of years in Colorado, my father moved us to Florida, and spent much of my adolescence being indoctrinated by evangelical fundamentalists, and they have as we've seen recently, especially recently with what's been happening with Trump losing the election. They have a sense of Christian nationalism, sort of say. I was really indoctrinated to believe in that ideology. So when September 11th happened, I felt like, this was real. I mean, somebody's going to have to pay for this. And I began a lot of smack talk, sort of say. However, my household was to an extent isolated, and I didn't grow up with a lot of social graces because my environment was not healthy for that. So after my parents' divorce, I graduated high school, but I didn't feel myself ready for school, sort of say. So if I figured that, if I was going to do something, and if I was going to, I might as well back up my smack talk. How we have to go and get the terrorists who caused 9/11, how we got to, fight for America. To those who are Christian nationalists, they have this idea that America should go on these grand freedom crusades to liberate oppressed people from evil, tyrannical, barbaric foes, to assure themselves that, I'm not talking about the country, but they themselves are the good guy. And that was me at the time. And the invasion had happened while I was still in high school, the initial invasion of Iraq. And I enlisted after high school in October of 2005. And it really wasn't what I was expecting. I was expecting some hotshot glory type that were honor bound, and what I ended up serving next to was guys who came from very difficult economic backgrounds, poor rural areas or slums of cities, and I felt that just fall in line, follow orders, it'd be that easy. It wasn't. In basic training, they try to break you. No matter how hard you try, they're trying to break you to get rid of your mentality that you had as a civilian and gets you into Army mentality, which is, there's no I in team. If you have ideas of self-glory, well, you're in the wrong organization. They have to break that away and get you to work as a unit, as a team, sort of say. It's a team effort. If one of you fails, then the whole team fails. And what's odd is that a lot of the guys I served with were people that my father had told me for a long time that they weren't successful people. The ones who don't go out and make careers and whatnot. They're poor, they're losers and whatnot. Well, they were anything far from it. They were far from it. And there was more to them. There was way more to them than I initially thought. And then we get to Iraq. By now, it's 2005. It's the insurgency. And initially, when we had invaded, the Shia majority and the Kurds had welcomed us in because they had suffered the most under Saddam's predominantly Sunni regime. It was a secular regime, but it was run by Sunnis and Sunni dominated and favored Sunnis. By the time I got there, which was in January of 2005, the occupation had been happening for almost 2 years now. And that's when the attitude among those in Iraq were starting to change towards us, especially since the commission that had sought to rebuild the country had been terminated, sort of saying, replaced with Paul Bremer, who was a Bush aide who, for a period of time, had oversaw the country as a quasi-dictatorship, sort of say. And what they were doing at the time was selecting, the Bush administration was selecting candidates to run in their elections, and the Iraqis wanted popularly chosen candidates that they could choose. It's a national right to it's self-determination. It's been preached a lot in history before, ever since the Great War, World War I. But of course, in the eyes of the Bush administration, that carried the risk of candidates that they didn't want. And what they wanted were candidates that would allow the U.S. to continue to make money, privatize the oil fields and allow American companies to rebuild their country for outrageous prices. And when I got there, the attitude among the Iraqis was starting to change. A lot of them had been unemployed for a long time. Ever since the invasion began, they were starting to suffer some hardships, and they were beginning to turn on American forces. And we were ill-equipped to deal with a insurgency. My unit was an MLRS unit, multiple launch rocket system for field artillery. But we never did any of that in Iraq. What they needed in Iraq were personnel that could just simply stand at guard points with an M16 and conduct basic patrols, which was predominantly infantry and MP oriented tasks. And they felt that, the basic combat training we got, which every soldier gets going in, was enough to meet those demands. Our vehicles, which were never intended for such roles, our HEMTs and our Humvees and our launchers, they had to be, their armor had to be improvised, hillbilly armor, we called it. Sandbags on the floor, take out the window, put iron plates along the side of the door. We convoyed from Kuwait to a place called Butler Range Complex, which was 30 miles east of Baghdad in the open desert. We had we had mostly guard duty and patrols. It was just our battery, which is artillery version of a company out there at Butler Range. The rest of our battalion was at a place called Summerall, and they had some, and we had some questionable policies. The heavy fighting was at Summerall, and a lot of our command staff didn't want to deal with much paperwork, so they were how can I put this in the best way? Whenever there would be contact, the order would be continue to monitor. They usually didn't want to return fire because they didn't want to deal with a lot of the paperwork.
Can you tell us a little bit more about any interactions you had with Iraqi civilians?
Well, yes, I'll talk about that. Having been indoctrinated by fundamentalists, I was susceptible to a lot of the Islamophobic and anti-Muslim rhetoric around me, how they worshipped a different God, how they were all bloodthirsty terrorists, mindless, savage barbarians. I won't go into detail. And then I meet some of the Iraqis who came on our post at Butler Range. Halliburton KBR was responsible for a lot of the service for soldiers, meal service, laundry service, etc. We had very little of that at Butler Range because we were such a small post that they didn't think to send much out there, except for those who cleaned our toilets and for log packs, which were the supplies that came in from the larger posts. So we ended up with a couple of Iraqis who were lucky enough to have a job with us. And I realized that a lot of the anti-Islamic rhetoric that I had been, that I was made to believe was just not true. And then I came to realize that the reason why I was willing to believe a lot of that rhetoric was because I wanted to feel like I was the good guy, that I was the morally superior one. And that's when good and evil started to get a little bit more, the concept of good and evil started to get way more complex than I ever thought it was. That these guys were good people too. And by the way, it's the same God as the Christian Jewish God in Islam. And that Islam was not the oppressive religion that we thought it was. What we were exposed to was a lot of fundamentalist Islam, Wahhabism, basically. And then when I started to really question our presence in Iraq was, of course, we hadn't found any weapons of mass destruction, pulling lots of guard duty to protect your immediate area. How is this progress? We're not going out and doing anything. We're just on guard for something to happen to us. How does that rebuild a country? How does that protect America? How is that liberation for a people? And I think the turning point came on a day in May when we were on a patrol. I was driving we were on a patrol of two Humvees, and I was driving the second Humvee, the rear Humvee. We had a regular patrol route, but we decided to go down a new route, down a road towards the west, where we knew there was a village, the nearest settlement towards us. And when the road when it came to the village, there was an S curve. And around that S curve comes a truck. A lot of the farmers in that area use the dump trucks to haul their crops. And the truck saw our patrol heading towards them, and it stopped. Now, at this point, the normal procedure would be to, from a distance, instruct the drivers to get out of the truck and walk towards us to be hand searched, make sure there's no weapons or bombs or explosives strapped to them, and then search the truck, make sure it's safe for it to pass us. And we had taken that for granted because a lot of the local nationals, the Iraqis, had been used to it by now, and we expected them to comply. This truck did something different. It started to turn around. In hindsight, they believed that the road was blocked, but at the time, we felt that oh my God, this is an insurgent trying to get away. Maybe they're on some critical mission, and we had just thwarted them or something. The lead Humvee starts to speed up, and I'm instructed to follow. It speeds past the truck, the lead Humvee, and cuts it off perpendicular to the road to where the driver's side was facing the front of the truck from a distance. And I was instructed to pull off behind the truck also from a distance. We were instructed to get out, and we got our N16s primed, ready to fire. And the driver of the lead Humvee also, and his TC was the NCO of the vehicle. He gets out with his M16. And I remember exactly who it was, but I'll keep him anonymous for obvious reasons. The truck slows down, but it doesn't come to a complete stop. Now, for proper escalation of force, we have the 4S, shout, shove, show, shoot. If we do not, and use each step to get them to comply to our directions. And if they don't comply, move to the next one. The guy shouts, my guy, he shouts, the truck slows down, but it's only inching forward, but it needs to come to a complete stop. He shows his M16, and then he had to skip the shove because the Iraqis are in the trucks, but he's now showing his M16. It still doesn't slow down, and he shoots it up, the truck. Now the truck stops. And since we had to escalate to a shooting, that makes this a hostile situation. So we treat the Iraqis as hostile now. We drag them out of the truck, and we pin them down to the ground and secure the area, waiting for further instruction from our post. And I remember we didn't have to do much to pin them. Even with M16s pointing at them but no hands or anything, they were pinned to the ground with their hands by their head, scared to death, crying. I mean, these two men, thought that they were going to die, that we were going to kill them. We didn't. We ended up zip tying their hands, putting them in our Humvees, and taking them back to Butler Range. We didn't have anybody to interrogate them there, so they had to be airlifted via Black Hawk helicopter towards one of the larger posts in Baghdad, Ras Maya, and for further interrogation. What happened to them, I'm not sure, but it could have been Abu Ghraib for all I know. And they weren't really they weren't hostile. They had no weapons. They had no explosives. And no one had gotten in trouble for it because we had actually used proper escalation of force.
When you were giving, when your commanding person, NCO, was giving instructions, shouting, was he shouting in a language? Was he shouting in English? How was he?
Arabic.
How can you communicate?
Humvees were equipped with signs that said "Stop and stay back" in English and Arabic. I couldn't really audibly hear the guy shouting stopping instructions, but he was making it very clear he was making it clear to us, at least, that he wanted them to stop. And for that matter, the truck was running. I don't know if they heard him over the sound of their engine. But the fact of the matter is that due to miscommunication, these two farmers who did nothing wrong had to suffer the reality of war, basically. And that's, I mean, we had done nothing wrong. We had used proper escalation of force, but that use of proper escalation of force had just ruined the day of two Iraqis who were just going on and doing their job, just going about their day. And the question came in my head: is this really helping anything, for that matter? All it did was make something worse. And that's the nature of a counterinsurgency. That's the nature of an occupation. You're a counterinsurgency erupts where you're not fighting a uniformed military. You're fighting civilians who are in civilian clothes, and innocents are civilian casualties happen in every war. In a counterinsurgency, it's going to be, it's most likely going to be a large percentage of those killed. And when you kill innocent civilians or detain them, in our case, you upset I'm trying to keep this as clean as possible. You upset their family, you upset their friends, who, for all you know, could have been potentially friendly towards you at first, and now they're going to be enemy because you just basically ruined their lives, sort of say. And that's when you start to realize that in a counterinsurgency, killing the enemy doesn't work. It just snowballs the situation. And the purpose of the military is to kill enemy combatants. It's not to rebuild countries. It's not to it's to kill an enemy combatant, plain and simple. It's when I realized that our presence there was not helping the situation. It was making it worse. And it was potentially making more enemies of the United States who would want to go and join terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda. And that's what Al-Qaeda knew that. I mean, before I had been over there, I was under the impression from the media, not from those in my chain of command, but from the media, that all those opposing us were foreign fighters coming over from Iran or from Syria, when in reality they were local nationals who were starting to suffer from our occupation. And what they were doing was no different than what we would do here if we were invaded and occupied. I mean, Americans would take up arms and resist if they were burdened by such an occupation. If they benefited, as some Iraqis did, then they'd probably go along with that. But most Iraqis weren't. They were caught in the crossfire.
Cam, did you at that point did you turn against the Iraqi war and the occupation? Did you speak against it, or what was in your mind at that time when you were still there and beginning to have all these doubts? And
well, it all stayed in my mind. That any disapproval about why we were there was, which I wasn't really the only one, was treated as an opinion. Everybody's entitled to their opinion, sort of say. But so long as you're dutifully manning your post and doing your job, you will, and you won't get in trouble. And that's basically, what I did. I kept a lot of things to myself and just carried on because there really wasn't much I could do about it. But I realized that this was not what we were supposed to be doing. This was not what we had signed up for. We could be doing better things. One contractors that were assigned us that I can remember were those who were there to clean our toilets, and they were making $7,000 to $10,000 a month, and they weren't Iraqis. I believe the ones at our post were, somebody said Hungarian. They didn't look Hungarian though. And at the larger post, KBR had contracted foreign expatriates, sort of say, from Pakistan, from India, from the United Arab Emirates to service food, do our laundry, etc. And the idea is, why can't the Iraqis be hired? Wouldn't they have jobs? We get them off the street, and they wouldn't join the insurgency, and maybe they'd benefit from us being there. And they were doing, the laundry guys were just doing a horrible job. But those at the larger posts were instructed, mandatory, give their laundry to KBR. Some of them had tried doing laundry in the sink on their own, but when they were caught, they were ordered to take it to KBR because they were getting $99 a bag. And in the time that we were at the larger post, which was nearing when we were going home, we kind of realized we had it made above the range a little bit. I mean, we didn't have the fancy stuff, but they weren't doing a horrible job with it. And also a lot of tasks that soldiers would have were being assigned to contractors like radio repairmen. Soldiers who had enlisted to repair radios were not being allowed to repair their radios. They were giving it to contractors, leaving those radio repair soldiers nothing to do but spend time on guard duty, sort of say. And the reason why contractors were taking over was because they had privatized a lot of the service sector since Dick Cheney was Secretary of Defense back in 1992. And during the occupation, they were under a cost plus incentive. Let's say you spent $100 on a piece of equipment. The government would, let's say KBR spent $100 on a piece of equipment. The government would reimburse that $100 and give them extra, like maybe 10 or something. So they'd spend $100, they'd make 110, so they'd make $10 just by spending the money. It was clear that, in addition to privatizing the oil, was also to make money in more ways. The war was about making money. I mean, that's why we were there. the oil was just, I mean, the oil was just part of the making the money. There was also the contractors, also getting American companies into Iraq that were to rebuild. And the war was about making money. That's why we were there.
So the KBR and Halliburton and other contractors were profiteering from the war and occupation, correct?
Yeah, and it felt kind of treasonous. I mean, here were a bunch of guys that I used to think low about, but now I held in high regard, who I bonded with, who I became family with, and we're here not doing anything productive, and yet our lives are at stake for reasons we were not told about. And the reason, and because, what kind of soldier would want to go into a combat zone for war profiteering? They wouldn't want to do that.
Why do you think people continue to support the war and the occupation? Before the war, there was a groundswell of opinion against it. We were in the streets. But after the war started, as you remember, there was very little agitation against it. Why wasn't there more? When people like yourself came back and told about conditions happening in Iraq, the war profiteering, the failures in communication with civilians and so on, and the maltreatment, why didn't a groundswell of opinion arise that would end the war? In fact, it's still in progress in many respects.
Well, opinion on the war, among Americans, the demonstrations, died after the initial invasion, because I feel that the demonstrations were meant to prevent the war from happening in the first place. But demonstrations did continue, and opinion shifted by the 2004 election. Opinion on the war shifted from a majority support to a majority opposed, and it only continued to grow as the occupation continued. Now, to answer your question, if you are if you still support the war, having been there, there's a few reasons. One, you want to avenge the death of a buddy, and it's understandable. The guy became like family to you, like a brother, and you're heartbroken that he was taken away from you. But the problem with that is nothing's bringing him back no matter what you do. And the only thing you do to try and seek revenge is put your life on the line and another buddy's life on the line. And casualties always happen in war. There's no such thing as an invincible military. Nothing. So it doesn't make much sense to put another buddy's life on the line. Or they don't want to admit that they went over there for a war profiteering cause, or that they had wasted their time there, because that would kind of make them feel like they were the bad guys. My advice to them would be, it doesn't. Did you honestly, when you made your oath of enlistment, feel that you were going there to protect the country or similar causes? If you could prove that intent in court, the verdict is not guilty. Okay, that was your intent, and nothing can change that. You were just simply, those higher up just simply took advantage of that commitment for profiteering, sort of say. And nothing you go through is a waste. You can always get something out of every situation. For me, I got the truth, sort of say. The Iraqi people were, all Muslims in general, Arabs and Muslims in general, were humanized, in my book. And I had learned how to work on a team. I had learned to see people from all walks of life in a better light. I essentially grew up over there. I had learned something. I mean, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. And the reason why a lot of civilians who had never been in the military like to support war is because, like I said, and this is, coming from my own personal experience, they love the idea that America goes on grand freedom crusades to liberate oppressed people from evil, tyrannical, barbaric foes, because it reasserts, these are civilians, these aren't, people in the military, because, once you go through basic training, you kind of have all that crushed out of you. But, the average civilian who has never, been in the military, it reinforces their sense of moral superiority, that, some way, somehow, they are the good guys, we're the ones, doing, freedom crusading, sort of say. It reinforces their sense of moral superiority. That some way, somehow, they are the good guy. And to say that, the United States did something wrong, like an illegal occupation, it strikes at their conscience. And that's when you see signs of cognitive dissonance.
This is a really interesting analysis of average citizens. Do you think these same reasons apply to politicians and other opinion leaders? Or do you think they're really cynical about it and that they, in fact, know what's happened, but either remain silent or continue to give explicit support for the, justification for the war and its and for the occupation? For example, I've never heard Bush apologize, or Cheney, or any of the folks that brought it about, Rumsfeld and the whole panoply of leaders. Nor have I heard the media, important figures in the media that supported the war, apologize for it. What do you think their motivations were, Cameron?
They thrive on a public believing in that freedom crusade mentality. Because if they were ever to apologize, then they would have to admit that the United States did something wrong, and that would destroy the war propaganda that the United States does, destroy their illusions of moral superiority. And they don't want them to lose that, because that, mentality keeps the support behind going to war for war profiteering, for war for resources, which is what most of our wars are about. And so the media is not, it's corporate. It's the corporate media. They have to sell ads. They have to sell advertisement. So they need to give their audience what they want to hear, but they're also they also have to control the rhetoric. How they don't want minds to change. They want minds to stay on a certain track. As far as the politicians are concerned, they receive a lot of briefings on what's going on in foreign affairs and what's going on in war, and they spend a lot of time with corporate donors. Most of the time that they spend, Democrat or Republican, they spend a lot of time with donors. They spend most of their time raising money for their campaigns, so that they would pass laws that would favor the corporation. Lobbying has unfortunately become they don't represent their constituents. They spend little time with their constituents. I mean, most of the politicians there are probably hoping to get a seat on a board somewhere. What we saw with Leffner and COVID, having put all that stock into companies that would thrive from the pandemic when she initially got the briefings. Language of America is what profits me. We've developed this sort of Ayn Randian idea of selfishness, the individual. I can tell you right now, anybody got caught in the military with that kind of mentality, they'd be a really, really effed up soldier. But those who are in it for the profiteering, to them, there is nothing more sacred than money. To them, the market solves everything. They treat the market as this infallible, ever-expanding entity that can solve everything. The idea is that he who has the most gold makes the rules. It's survival of the fittest. It's social Darwinism. So they developed a different morality, I would like to say, that, you know, if they're making billions of dollars, then they're doing good. They're doing good. I mean, who cares who gets caught in the crossfire? I think they've gaslighted themselves to the point where they honestly believe that, you know, war where people die on both sides is somehow good if you make money off of it. Before the first Gulf War in 1991, when word of the initial ground invasion hit the floor on Wall Street, they cheered because they knew that there was going to be money made off of it and the value of their stocks would go up. They cheered. Didn't they know that people on both sides would die? I think they did, but they convinced, hey, if we're expanding our markets and we're making profits for our companies, some way, somehow, it's good. And the politicians who receive, you know, money from these corporations via lobbying and campaign financing, they think that they think the same.
Would you agree that given the devastation, economic and psychological devastation, I mean, I think of the harrowing story you told of these two farmers who were probably innocent of any attempt to resist the U.S. forces. When you think about that on a huge scale, on a nationwide scale of trauma produced, depleted uranium that's causing all kinds of injuries and continues to have an effect on the preborn. Do you think reparations to the Iraqi people is morally mandatory by this country?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. But the problem is that corporate America has bought our government, has bought our politicians, has bought our government. They are pulling the strings, and they will never send money to anything they will never want to send money to anything that does not go into the market or goes towards company value of stock. Reparations don't do that. That's why they hate government so much, is because you throw money into a public institution. That public institution is not part of the market. It doesn't make profit. That's money wasted for their sacred market. That's why they want to privatize everything, because they generally believe that the market solves anything. So you throw something into the market, then all will be well. I mean, that's literally what they believe. So they'll never, so long as they're calling the shots in our government, they'll never want to send reparations to the Iraqi people, because it's not going towards markets. It's not going to the stock in their company. To them, it's waste of money. But to me, it would be justice. It'd be justice to an extent.
We talk about what the government can do. Can you tell our audience a little bit about what you've done on the campus of Northern Illinois? What you personally done in terms of alerting people to the barbarity and savagery of the U.S. War and occupation.
I was with IVAW when I was at Harper. That's Iraq Veterans Against the War, and I had done several speakings and panels. However, those only go so far to alert people, because what I've noticed is that people are going to believe what they want to believe. A lot of people's minds are set. So you testify against the war. Those who with an open mind are going to be alerted towards that. But those people have already tended to not favor war, and they can, and even without testimony, they can see an unjust war very easily. Your other audience still likes to the rest of your audience still loves to maintain that idea of moral superiority, and then their cognitive dissonance would start to surface. What I've done, though, for my senior thesis, I did a paper on GI opposition to the global war on terror, which is what I went through, and I bring it up in conversation whenever I could. In fact, I started the VFP chapter here in DeKalb, and we were going to start setting up our bank account and start raising money in 2020, but then the pandemic happened and everything has been on hold to an extent. And the theme of our chapter is going to be depropagandization. Make light of what the media tries to do in order to develop a pro-war minded mentality, and trying to deprogram a lot of, and basically deprogram, so to say, the truth about, not just war, but the truth behind the propaganda that tries to fuel a pro-war mentality. And what we need to do is we need to prevent that. We need to prevent, younger people from being exposed to war propaganda, and make them aware of the truth of war, so that they don't develop a sense of cognitive dissonance and glorify war, sort of say, for their own personal delusion of moral superiority.
This has been extraordinarily interesting, and we need to conclude at this point. But we also want to invite our audience for a kind of part 2 here in our interview of Cameron. Cameron has struggled with post-traumatic stress disorder in coming back to the United States, as many veterans have and are continuing to. And I'd like in our second program to have Cameron tell his story of the challenges he's had to face with the Veterans Administration. So I want to thank you, Cameron, for this extraordinarily interesting and deeply moving narrative.
And thank you for having me, Roger. civilian casualties happen in every war. In a counterinsurgency, it's going to be, it's most likely going to be a large percentage of those killed. And when you kill innocent civilians or detain them, in our case, you upset their family, you upset their friends, who, for all you know, could have been potentially friendly towards you at first, and now they're going to be enemy because you just basically ruin their lives. That's when you start to realize that in a counterinsurgency, killing the enemy doesn't work. It just snowballs the situation. And the purpose of the military is to kill enemy combatants. It's not to rebuild countries. It's to kill an enemy combatant, plain and simple. It's when I realized that our presence there was not helping the situation. It was making it worse. And it was potentially making more enemies of the United States who would want to go and join terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda. And that's what Al-Qaeda knew that. I mean, before I had been over there, I was under the impression from the media, not from those in my chain of command, but from the media, that all those opposing us were foreign fighters coming over from Iran or from Syria, when in reality they were local nationals who were starting to suffer from our occupation. And what they were doing was no different than what we would do here if we were invaded and occupied.